Most people think New York's greatest lost treasure vanished because time simply moved on, because even a 130-room palace couldn't compete with progress. But the truth is far darker. This mansion wasn't just demolished, it was surrendered, emptied out room by room as a dynasty unraveled behind locked doors. Its marble halls once echoed with power, yet by the end they held only silence, unanswered letters, and a family line collapsing under its own weight. Tonight, we uncover why one of the grandest homes ever built lasted less than a human lifetime, and why its disappearance still haunts Fifth Avenue. The year is 1878. Fifth Avenue between 50th and 59th Streets has become America's most expensive stretch of real estate. The air smells of horse manure and ambition. Here, the new industrial titans are building monuments to themselves. Each mansion tries to outshine the last. Each fortune demands architectural proof of its power. The Vanderbilts are watching, and the Vanderbilts do not lose. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the original Commodore, died the year before, leaving behind $100 million. This made him the richest man in America. His fortune came from steamships and railroads, from buying competitors and crushing rivals, from a lifetime of calculated ruthlessness, disguised as business acumen. That money now flows through his grandchildren. The empire fragments into branches, each one hungry to prove itself the true inheritor of the Commodore's vision. Cornelius Vanderbilt stands at the center of this contest. He's the eldest grandson. He runs the New York Central Railroad. He possesses the discipline his grandfather valued, the work ethic that built an empire from nothing. But discipline alone won't secure a dynasty's future. In the Gilded Age, you must be seen. You must be envied. You must occupy space in the public imagination so completely that your name becomes synonymous with permanence. Architecture is the weapon of choice. Down the avenue, Cornelius watches his younger brother Willie build a castle at 52nd Street. Then he watches Willie's wife Alva, brilliant, ambitious, socially ferocious Alva, turn that castle into a fortress of social power. Her costume ball in 1883 forces even the old Knickerbocker families to acknowledge Vanderbilt's supremacy. The message is clear. Stone speaks louder than money. A mansion is a declaration that cannot be ignored. Cornelius feels the pressure. He's the family's standard bearer, the guardian of the Commodore's legacy. His younger brother just stole the spotlight. This cannot stand. So in 1879, Cornelius begins acquiring property. Not just one lot, an entire city block. The northwest corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street. He buys out homeowners, negotiates with holdouts, assembles a rectangular kingdom measuring 200 feet along 5th Avenue and 400 feet deep. This will not be a house. This will be a statement that closes all arguments. He hires George B. Post, one of New York's most respected architects. The instructions are simple and impossible. Build something that cannot be surpassed. Make it larger than any private residence in the city. Make it beautiful enough to silence critics. Make it permanent. The design emerges slowly, refined through revision after revision. Post draws inspiration from French chateaux, from Italian palazzi, from every European palace that ever announced aristocratic dominance. The result is something uniquely American in its excess, a hybrid monster that devours architectural traditions and spits out supremacy. Construction begins in 1883. The foundation goes deep, anchored in Manhattan bedrock. The frame rises in red brick, then disappears behind a skin of carved limestone and red sandstone. Towers puncture the skyline. Dormers multiply across the roofline like watching eyes. The numbers alone tell a story of compulsion. 130 rooms, 50 bathrooms, a grand ballroom stretching 70 feet, a dining room that seats 200, a hall of marble rising 3 stories, flooded with light from stained glass windows designed by John Lafarge himself. The main staircase is carved oak, every inch covered in botanical detail. The library holds tens of thousands of volumes, its walls lined with Circassian walnut. The morning room glows with mother-of-pearl inlays. Louis Comfort Tiffany designs entire suites, pouring his genius into glass mosaics that fracture light into prayer. Every surface demands attention. Every corner announces cost. The house doesn't whisper wealth, it shouts it from limestone lungs. But the mansion's true ambition reveals itself in the floor plan. This is not designed for comfort. It's designed for ceremony, for procession, for the constant performance of social dominance. The public rooms occupy the Fifth Avenue frontage, windows onto glory for anyone passing by. Behind them, deeper in the block, the private family quarters hide in relative simplicity. And behind those, filling the remainder of the vast footprint, the service wings sprawl in utilitarian brick, kitchens, pantries, storage rooms, servant quarters, laundries, coal cellars, mechanical rooms. The mansion is an iceberg. The beautiful 10th floats on Fifth Avenue. The working 9/10ths remain hidden. Cornelius spares no expense because expense is the point. European craftsmen arrive by steamship. Marble comes from Italy. Oak comes from England. Artisans work for months on single door frames. The construction drags on for 2 years, then swells with additions and modifications that continue through the early 1890s. The final cost exceeds $3 million, equivalent to roughly $90 million today, though even that number fails to capture the concentrated extravagance. This isn't just money spent, it's money transformed into permanence, into stone that will outlast empires, or so Cornelius believes. The mansion opens to the public gaze in 1885. Newspapers struggle for adequate superlatives. Architecture critics declare it the finest private residence in America. Society columnists document every detail, measuring the Vanderbilt triumph in square footage and marble tonnage. Cornelius has won. He's built a fortress that cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed, cannot be matched. The house announces to everyone who passes, here lives a family that has conquered time itself. The mansion stands complete. Its limestone facade glows in morning light. Its towers pierce the skyline. Its windows blaze with gaslight after dark. It looks eternal. It looks invincible. It looks like exactly what it was meant to be. A dynasty's proof of permanence rendered in stone. But a house is never just architecture. A house is an organism, and every organism requires feeding. The mansion wakes before dawn. In the basement, fires are already burning. Coal arrives by the cartload, carried down into cellars through street-level hatches, then shoveled into furnaces that feed miles of iron piping. The heating system is a circulatory system, pumping warmth through a body that would otherwise freeze. In winter, the house devours 5 tons of coal per week. Upstairs, servants move through darkened hallways lighting gas lights, then later replacing them with the newfangled electric bulbs Cornelius reluctantly installs. Someone must reach every fixture. Someone must carry matches and bulbs. Someone must climb ladders in the dark. The house has 130 rooms. Each room demands care. In the kitchens, cooks arrive at 5 in the morning. Breakfast service for the family requires coordination across multiple courses, each prepared in copper pots on massive coal-fired ranges. The kitchens occupy an entire wing, connected to the dining room by a butler's pantry, connected to the street by a service entrance where vendors deliver meat, produce milk, ice, wine. The staff numbers between 30 and 40 people on any given day. More during social season when the mansion hosts dinners and balls. Each servant occupies a precise rung in an invisible hierarchy. The butler commands the male staff. The housekeeper commands the female staff. Below them, footmen, valets, ladies' maids, parlour maids, chambermaids, kitchen maids, scullery maids, laundresses, cooks, assistant cooks, coachmen, stable hands, maintenance men. They live in the house, sleeping in small rooms in the upper floors and attic spaces. They eat in the house, served meals in a servant's dining hall. They work 6 days a week, sometimes 7. They wear uniforms. They use the back stairs. They become invisible by design. The Vanderbilts see them only when they're needed. Otherwise, the servants exist as ghosts, present but unseen, hearing everything but saying nothing. This is the machinery that makes the mansion function. Without it, the house is just empty rooms and cold marble. But machinery costs money. Constant, relentless money. Salaries for the staff alone approach $40,000 per year. Then come the operating expenses. Coal, gas, electricity, water, food, maintenance, repairs, replacements. The boilers require annual servicing. The plumbing develops leaks. The roof needs attention. The limestone facade begins to stain from city soot and requires cleaning. The wooden floors need refinishing. The carpets wear out. The draperies fade and must be replaced. Every year the house demands more. Cornelius can afford it. His share of the Vanderbilt fortune generates income far exceeding the mansion's appetite. But affordability isn't the same as sustainability. The fortune is large, but it's not infinite, and it's dividing with each generation. The Commodore left nearly everything to one son. That son split the fortune among his children. Those children will split it further. The money that once belonged to a single ruthless man now flows through dozens of hands, each one taking what they need, none adding to the principal. Fortunes don't grow through inheritance. They grow through creation. And the Vanderbilts are no longer creating. Cornelius works. He runs the New York Central Railroad with genuine competence. But he's managing an existing empire, not building a new one. The age of railroad expansion is ending. Competition intensifies. Profit margins shrink. The industry that made the Vanderbilts rich is maturing into regulated stability. Meanwhile, the mansion consumes without hesitation. But the true cost isn't measured in coal or salaries. It's measured in something harder to quantify, the psychological weight of maintaining perfection. Cornelius and Alice Vanderbilt live under constant scrutiny. Every dinner party is dissected by society reporters. Every detail of their lives becomes public property. The mansion is both their home and their stage, and the performance never ends. Alice bears the heaviest burden. As mistress of the house, she manages the social calendar, supervises the servants, ensures every event proceeds flawlessly. She sits for portraits, hosts charity functions, attends the opera in gowns that cost more than most families earn in a year. She does this while raising 7 children in a house that feels more like a museum than a home. The private quarters are comfortable, even luxurious, but they're surrounded by ceremonial spaces that demand formality. The children grow up walking past marble statues and Tiffany mosaics on their way to breakfast. They learn early that their home is public property, that their lives are performances, that privacy is a privilege they don't actually possess. And then tragedy arrives, as it always does, indifferent to wealth. In 1896, their eldest son, also named Cornelius, contracts typhoid fever. He's 21 years old. He survives the fever but emerges weakened, his health permanently compromised. He'll die 13 years later from a cerebral hemorrhage, never fully recovering from the illness that nearly killed him in his youth. The house cannot protect them. Money cannot protect them. All the marble and oak and stained glass amount to nothing against disease and death. Cornelius himself suffers a stroke in 1896. He's only 53. The stroke leaves him partially paralyzed. He retreats from active management of the railroad. His brother Alfred assumes control of the business. The mansion becomes less a symbol of power and more a symbol of fragility, a fortress occupied by wounded kings. Cornelius lingers for 3 more years, moving slowly through rooms built to announce dominance. The irony is inescapable. He commissioned this house to prove his strength. Now it witnesses his decline. He dies on September 12, 1899. He's 55 years old. The mansion passes entirely to Alice. She's now the sole owner of a monument that was never built for one person. The house was designed for spectacle, for hosting hundreds of guests, for demonstrating social supremacy through constant performance. Alice is 54 years old and has just buried her husband. She has no interest in performance, but she cannot simply abandon the house. It's the family seat, the architectural embodiment of Vanderbilt prestige. To leave it empty would be to admit defeat, to concede that the dynasty is crumbling. So Alice stays. She maintains the house. She keeps the staff. She opens the public rooms for charity events. She performs the duties expected of her. But the mansion is too large for one woman. Entire wings go unused. Rooms that once blazed with gaslight now sit dark for months. The silence grows. Alice closes off sections of the house to reduce operating costs. She dismisses servants, shrinking the staff to a skeleton crew. The mansion begins to feel hollow, a shell designed for hundreds, occupied by a widow and a handful of employees. Outside, Fifth Avenue is changing. The residential character that defined the street in the 1880s is dissolving. Retail shops appear at ground level. Office buildings rise where townhouses once stood. The grand mansions that lined the avenue begin to look like relics, expensive curiosities occupying space that could generate commercial rent. Property taxes reflect this transformation. The land beneath the mansion becomes more valuable than the mansion itself. The city assesses property values based on potential commercial use, not sentimental attachment to architectural beauty. Alice pays the taxes. The bills arrive annually, growing larger as the neighborhood transforms. What was once the most fashionable residential address in America is becoming a commercial corridor. The mansion sits in the center of this transformation, like a dinosaur watching the mammals inherit the earth. Alice doesn't leave. She remains in the house for 35 years after Cornelius dies. She watches Fifth Avenue morph into a shopping district. She watches skyscrapers rise around her limestone fortress. She watches the city devour the Gilded Age block by block. And she watches her children scatter. The Vanderbilt fortune continues its slow dissolution. The children marry, establish their own households, pursue their own interests. Some remain in New York. Others build estates in Newport or venture abroad. The coherent dynasty the Commodore built fragments into individual lives, each one comfortable but no longer united by shared purpose. Money alone doesn't create a dynasty. Money without power is just wealth, and the Vanderbilts are losing power. The railroad empire continues, but the family's control weakens. Professional managers replace family members. Boardrooms replace drawing rooms. The Vanderbilt name still commands respect, but respect is not the same as dominance. The mansion stands as a monument to an era that's already over, an era when fortunes were concentrated, when families ruled industries, when a single man could leave an empire to his children and expect it to last. That world is dying. The progressive era brings regulation, antitrust laws, labor rights, income taxes. The Industrial Revolution that made the Vanderbilts rich is maturing into something more complex, more democratic, less friendly to dynastic ambitions. Alice remains in the mansion, but she's not maintaining a dynasty. She's maintaining a memory. The house still demands feeding. The coal still arrives. The servants still work. The bills still come. But the purpose has vanished. The mansion was built to announce power. Now it announces only persistence. And persistence, no matter how expensive, cannot hold back time. Alice Vanderbilt dies on April 22nd, 1934. She's 89 years old. She spent the final decades of her life as the mansion's last defender, the only person with both the resources and the will to keep it alive. With her death, the house loses its protector. The timing is catastrophic. The Great Depression has been ravaging America for nearly 5 years. Banks have failed. Fortunes have evaporated. The stock market that once seemed invincible has revealed itself as fragile as everything else. Even the Vanderbilts have suffered. The family fortune, still substantial, has nevertheless shrunk. The railroad industry struggles. Investments have turned sour. The careful accumulation of 70 years has proven vulnerable to forces beyond any family's control. More importantly, the Depression has transformed how Americans think about wealth. The ostentatious displays of the Gilded Age now seem obscene. Mansions like Cornelius's no longer inspire envy. They inspire resentment. The house that once announced supremacy now announces excess. Alice's will divides her estate among her surviving children, but none of them want the mansion. They have their own homes, their own lives, their own financial pressures. The house is a burden, not an inheritance. The operating costs alone make it unsustainable. Even with reduced staff and closed wings, the mansion still consumes tens of thousands of dollars per year in maintenance, taxes, and utilities. No single heir can justify that expense for a house they don't want to live in. And there's no market for it. Who would buy a 130-room mansion in 1934? Who has both the money and the desire to take on such a colossal obligation? The answer is simple. No one. The house could function as an institution, a museum perhaps, or a cultural centre. But that would require a donor willing to fund its operations in perpetuity. The Vanderbilt heirs are wealthy, but they're not that wealthy. And they're not inclined to sacrifice their own financial security to preserve a monument to their grandparents' ambition. So the mansion sits empty. The servants are dismissed. The utilities are shut off. The windows go dark. For the first time since 1885, the house is silent. But silence doesn't pause the clock. Every month of vacancy increases the danger. Empty buildings decay faster than occupied ones. Water pipes freeze and burst. Roofs leak. Vandals break in. The house begins to die. The family faces a decision that would have been unthinkable 20 years earlier. They must sell the land. But there's a problem. The mansion is a landmark. Its demolition would be controversial. Some in New York society remember the glory days of Fifth Avenue, when the street represented American aristocracy at its peak. They argue for preservation. The arguments fall on deaf ears. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. Nostalgia doesn't maintain plumbing. The house is too expensive to save and too valuable to ignore. The Vanderbilt heirs make a practical calculation. They can preserve their grandfather's monument and go broke, or they can sell the land and preserve their own financial futures. They choose survival. In 1926, 8 years before Alice's death, the family had already begun the dismemberment. They sold the southern portion of the lot, the section stretching along 57th Street. A developer demolished that portion and erected a commercial building. The mansion was still occupied then, still alive, but it had been wounded. The full city block that Cornelia so carefully assembled was now broken. The house that was meant to command an entire corner had been reduced to a fragment of its original footprint. Alice witnessed this amputation. She said nothing publicly. What could she say? The family needed money. The land was worth more than the memories. Now, in 1934, the remainder of the property goes on the market. The asking price reflects the land's commercial potential, not the mansion's architectural significance. Developers circle immediately. They see gold, a prime Fifth Avenue location in a neighborhood already dominated by retail and office towers. The fact that a historic mansion occupies the site is irrelevant. Worse, it's an obstacle. The building must be demolished before the land can be productive. Preservation advocates make their final stand. They appeal to the city. They appeal to wealthy philanthropists. They appeal to the Vanderbilt family's sense of legacy. All appeals fail. The economics are irresistible. The land is worth millions. The mansion generates no income. The property taxes continue regardless of sentiment. Every month the decision is delayed costs money. In 1940, the house is sold to developers. The purchase agreement includes an implicit understanding. The mansion will be demolished. But World War II intervenes. Resources are diverted to the war effort. Construction projects are delayed. The mansion receives a temporary reprieve, not through anyone's desire to save it, but through sheer logistical necessity. The house sits vacant through the war years, slowly deteriorating. Windows break. Weather penetrates the roof. The interiors that once glowed with Tiffany glass and carved oak begin to rot. The mansion is dying in public, its slow decay visible to anyone walking past. The limestone facade still possesses echoes of former beauty, but the echoes grow fainter every year. Finally, in 1947, the demolition begins. Crews arrive with sledgehammers and wrecking bars. They work methodically, room by room, stripping the house of anything valuable. Carved woodwork is salvaged and sold. Light fixtures are removed. Marble is pulled from walls. Stained glass windows are carefully extracted and auctioned. The house is being dismembered piece by piece, its parts scattered to collectors and dealers who will sell them to other wealthy families building their own monuments. Then come the wrecking machines. They attack the structure systematically, reducing stone and brick to rubble. The towers fall. The walls collapse. The grand staircase, that masterpiece of carved oak, is smashed into firewood. The work takes months. The mansion was built to last centuries. It resists destruction the way it resisted everything, with mass and stubbornness. But resistance means nothing against economics and dynamite. By early 1948, the last stones are carted away. This site is levelled. The land that once held one of America's grandest private residences is now an empty lot, scraped clean, ready for its next incarnation. The mansion lasted 63 years from conception to demolition. Cornelia spent 5 years planning and building it. Alice spent 35 years defending it. The heirs spent 14 years trying to figure out what to do with it, and now it's gone, erased, replaced by nothing for the moment. The absence is shocking. People who walked past the mansion for decades suddenly find themselves staring at empty space. The skyline has changed. The neighborhood has changed. The entire character of Fifth Avenue has changed. But the city doesn't mourn. The city moves forward. That's what cities do. In 1951, Bergdorf Goodman opens its new flagship store on the site where the Vanderbilt mansion once stood. The department store occupies the exact footprint Cornelia spent 5 years assembling, the land he believed would anchor his family's legacy for generations. The irony is perfect and painful. A monument to aristocratic permanence has been replaced by a temple of commercial transaction. The house built to remove the Vanderbilts from the marketplace has been returned to it, not as residence, but as retail. Shoppers now walk where Alice Vanderbilt once hosted charity benefits. Display windows occupy the space where Tiffany mosaics once fractured light into beauty. Escalators move customers through air that once carried the scent of coal fires and fresh flowers. The transformation is complete. The mansion has been replaced by exactly the kind of commercial intrusion it was meant to transcend. And yet the store succeeds brilliantly. Bergdorf Goodman becomes one of New York's premier luxury retailers, drawing wealthy customers from around the world. The location generates millions in annual revenue. The property taxes are paid without complaint. The space is productive in ways the mansion never was. The developers were right. The land was more valuable than the legacy. But this truth reveals something uncomfortable about how American society values permanence. We claim to honor history, to respect beauty, to cherish architectural achievement. Yet when forced to choose between preservation and profit, we choose profit almost every time. The Vanderbilt mansion wasn't demolished because it lacked beauty or significance. It was demolished because beauty doesn't pay property taxes. Significance doesn't generate returns. History is expensive, and expenses must be justified. Cornelius built the mansion to prove his family's permanence. He believed that stone could secure what money alone could not. A lasting legacy, a name that would endure through architecture. He was wrong. Stone is not permanent. Stone is simply expensive. The Vanderbilt dynasty didn't collapse because the family lost its money. Even after the Depression, the various Vanderbilt branches remained wealthy by any reasonable measure. They lived comfortably, travelled extensively, maintained estates and apartments. The dynasty collapsed because it lost its purpose. The Commodore built an empire through ruthless expansion and absolute control. His children inherited wealth, but not his hunger. His grandchildren inherited comfort, but not his vision. By the fourth generation, the Vanderbilts had become what they once despised, passive inheritors living on accumulated capital, adding nothing new to the family legacy. The mansion's fate reflects this trajectory perfectly. It was built as a symbol of active power, a declaration that the Vanderbilts were still building, still expanding, still dominating. But maintaining symbols requires constant effort and constant expense. Eventually the cost exceeds the value. When Alice died, the house lost its purpose because the dynasty had already lost its cohesion. The Vanderbilts were no longer a unified force. They were individuals with individual interests, connected by name and inheritance, but not by shared ambition. Without ambition, monuments become burdens. The mansion's demolition represents more than one family's decline. It represents the end of an entire social order, the Gilded Age aristocracy that believed wealth could purchase permanence. Fifth Avenue in the 1880s was a street of private palaces, each one declaring its owner's position in an imagined American nobility. By the 1950s, almost all those palaces were gone, replaced by office towers, hotels, and department stores. The transformation wasn't random, it was inevitable. American capitalism rewards productivity, not pedigree. Land in Manhattan has value only if it generates returns. A mansion might be beautiful, but beauty alone doesn't justify holding land that could support a 50-story office building. The old families learned this lesson painfully. The Astors sold their mansions, the Carnegies sold their mansions, the Vanderbilts sold their mansions. One by one, the private palaces fell to commercial development. The city itself was changing. New York in the 1880s was still small enough that wealthy families could dominate its social life. By the 1920s, the city had become too large, too diverse, too complex for any single class to control. Immigration brought millions of new residents who had no interest in deference to old money. The rise of mass media created new celebrities who owed nothing to traditional social hierarchies. Business generated fortunes that dwarfed even the Vanderbilts, and the new rich had no patience for the social rituals of the Gilded Age. The mansion was built for a world that was already disappearing. Cornelius just couldn't see it yet. Perhaps the saddest aspect of the mansion's story is how quickly it was forgotten. By the 1960s, few New Yorkers under 50 even remembered that a Vanderbilt mansion once stood at 5th Avenue and 57th Street. The house that dominated society columns for 2 decades simply vanished from collective memory. Some architectural historians mourned its loss. A few preservationists pointed to it as an example of cultural vandalism, but most people moved on without looking back. The mansion's physical destruction was merely the final act in a longer process of erasure, a process that began the moment Cornelius died, and the house lost its animating purpose. Buildings don't have souls, but they can have meaning, and meaning requires active maintenance, just like plumbing and roofing. The Vanderbilt mansion lost its meaning long before it lost its walls. Once it became simply a house, expensive, oversized, inconvenient, its destruction was inevitable. What remains now is the story, and the lesson embedded in that story. Fortunes are temporary, fame is temporary, architecture is temporary. Nothing built by human hands carries a guarantee of permanence. The Commodore believed he was founding a dynasty. He built his fortune through force of will and ruthless competition. He passed that fortune to his children with the expectation that they would preserve and expand it. Instead, they spent it. Slowly, comfortably, without malice, but spent it nonetheless. The mansion was the most visible symbol of that spending. Every year it stood, it consumed a portion of the family's capital. Coal, salaries, maintenance, taxes, the expenses never stopped. And unlike a business or investment, the house generated no returns. It was beautiful, it was impressive, it was famous, but it was fundamentally unproductive. This is the trap of monumental architecture. Buildings demand resources but produce nothing. They can symbolize wealth, but they can't create it. Eventually, the cost of maintenance exceeds the value of symbolism. When that moment arrives, the monuments fall. Not all at once, but gradually. First through neglect, then through calculation, finally through deliberate destruction. The Vanderbilt mansion's demolition wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of logic. The family could no longer afford to maintain a symbol they no longer needed. The city could no longer justify preserving a private palace on land that could serve the public through commerce. So the house came down, and in its place rose something more useful, more productive, more suited to the city's evolving needs. This is how cities work. This is how capitalism works. This is how time works. Buildings that serve no purpose beyond remembering the past eventually lose to buildings that serve the present. Perhaps Cornelius's greatest failure was believing that stone could substitute for achievement. He thought the mansion would preserve his family's legacy. Instead, the mansion became the legacy, an expensive, beautiful, ultimately futile attempt to hold back time. True legacies aren't built with limestone and marble. They're built with ideas, institutions, and sustained excellence across generations. The Commodore's legacy was his empire, the railroad networks that connected cities, the shipping lines that moved goods, the financial systems that enabled commerce. Those were productive. Those created value. Those justified their existence through utility. The mansion created nothing. It simply consumed. And consumption, no matter how elegant, cannot sustain a dynasty. Today, few physical traces of the Vanderbilt mansion remain. Some architectural elements were salvaged before demolition. Carved panels, light fixtures, bits of decorative stonework. These fragments appear occasionally in auction catalogues or in the collections of other historic houses. But the mansion as a complete work no longer exists. It survives only in photographs, floor plans, and written descriptions. These records show us what was lost. They document the scale, the beauty, the obsessive attention to detail that defined Gilded Age excess. They let us imagine what it must have felt like to walk through those marble halls, to climb that carved staircase, to stand in a ballroom designed to hold hundreds. But imagination isn't the same as experience. The mansion, is gone. The dynasty that built it has dispersed into comfortable obscurity. The fortune that made it possible has dissolved across generations. What remains is the lesson, a warning disguised as history. Monuments cannot protect you from time. Wealth cannot guarantee permanence. Architecture cannot preserve a legacy that isn't built on something more durable than stone. The Vanderbilt mansion stood for 63 years. Its absence has lasted 77 and counting. In the end, perhaps that absence is the most perfect monument of all, a void that reminds us how quickly even the mightiest works can vanish, how fragile our dreams of permanence truly are, and how the city always, always wins. The story of the Vanderbilt mansion isn't just about one family or one house. It's about the illusion of permanence that wealth creates, and the harsh awakening when that illusion shatters. If this exploration of America's lost architectural monuments resonated with you, let me know in the comments which estate should be examined next. The Gilded Age left us dozens of similar stories, dynasties that built fortunes and then watched them crumble, mansions that promised eternity and barely lasted a lifetime. And if you found this deep dive valuable, consider subscribing. We're building an archive of forgotten grandeur, one mansion at a time. Because the best way to honour what's been lost isn't to pretend it was perfect, it's to understand why it failed and what those failures reveal about the world we've inherited.